In the vast expanse of the Pacific Ocean, a tale of survival, despair, and madness unfolded. On July 13, 1829, the crew of the Essex, a whaling ship, encountered a nightmarish event that would leave them stranded at sea for months. But what makes this story so chilling isn't just the initial shipwreck or the perilous journey. They were lost for years, battling the elements, fighting starvation, and even turning to the unthinkable in their desperation to survive. This is their terrifying true story, and it's a stark reminder of the brutal power of the ocean and the fragility of human life. Viewer discretion is strongly advised. The story begins with an ordinary voyage journey that any seasoned whaler would expect. The Essex, a sturdy American whaling ship, set sail from Nantucket, Massachusetts, in August 1819 on a routine whaling expedition. The crew, under the command of Captain George Pollard Jr., had set their sights on the distant Pacific Ocean, specifically the Galapagos Islands, for a rich harvest of whale oil. Everything seemed set for a successful journey. Little did they know, fate had other plans, and they were about to sail straight into the heart of a tragedy that would forever change the lives of those aboard. The first signs of trouble, as the Essex ventured farther from the familiar shores of Nantucket. Things began to go awry. The crew faced fierce storms, but nothing out of the ordinary for a whaling voyage. Then, one day in November 1820, disaster struck. A whale, a massive sperm whale, attacked the ship. This wasn't some simple skirmish between man and beast, as is typical with whaling. No, this whale, in an extraordinary show of aggression, rammed the Essex with its head, repeatedly striking the ship and causing irreparable damage. The ship's hull was breached, and the Essex began to sink. Leaving the crew with no choice but to abandon ship, the men were left adrift in small, open whaleboats, thousands of miles from land, with no provisions and only the clothes on their backs. What followed was a nightmare beyond comprehension. This was only the beginning of their harrowing ordeal. Desperate measures, the men, now stranded in the open sea, quickly realized the extent of their peril. With only 3 small boats to carry the 20-man crew, they had to figure out how to survive. The immediate concerns were basic: food and water. They had no idea how long they would be adrift, but they knew that without a miracle, their chances of survival were slim. The men rationed their limited supplies, but they knew it wouldn't be enough. What could they do? Days turned into weeks, and the ocean seemed to mock their efforts. At the mercy of the waves, the men's hopes began to fade. Yet they pressed on, trying to stay alive with what little they had left. Their desperate situation worsened as days stretched into weeks with no land in sight. They drifted across the Pacific Ocean, their fate sealed by the brutality of nature. Cannibalism, the darkest descent, as starvation set in and their bodies weakened. The men's situation became increasingly grim. They were lost at sea, with no food and no fresh water. The men began to succumb to the elements. Dehydration, exhaustion, and sunstroke ravaged their bodies, and still, no land appeared on the horizon. It was during these agonizing days of starvation that the crew made an unimaginable decision that would haunt them forever. As their situation grew increasingly dire, the men turned to cannibalism. The first victim was one of their own, a young man named Richard Parker. In a desperate act of survival, the men killed him and ate his flesh to stay alive. The reality of what they had done sank in slowly. At first, it was a last resort, a temporary measure to stave off death. But as days turned into weeks and then months, the need for food became more pressing. It was the harsh reality of life adrift on the ocean. With no supplies, no options, and no hope of rescue, the men resorted to the unthinkable. The rescue, after over 3 months at sea, surviving on the bodies of their comrades and the meager scraps of food they could scavenge. The remaining men were finally rescued. A passing ship, the Indian, spotted their distress signal and brought them aboard. They had survived. But the horrors they had endured, the decisions they had made, would haunt them for the rest of their lives. Out of the 20 men who had set sail on the Essex, only 8 remained alive when they were rescued. The others had perished, either from starvation, dehydration, or from being killed in the act of cannibalism. It was a tragedy on a scale that few had ever experienced, and the survivors were left to carry the weight of their actions for the rest of their lives. The aftermath? A legacy of horror. The tale of the Essex and its crew became one of the most infamous stories in maritime history. It was a story of survival, yes, but it was also a story of moral degradation, of men pushed to their limits by the unforgiving sea. The tale sparked a public outcry, and the men who survived were met with a mixture of sympathy and revulsion. Their story became a dark chapter in the history of whaling, and it forever changed the way people viewed the industry. Captain Pollard, who had been rescued but lost nearly all of his crew, faced the consequences of the tragedy in his own way. He was later given command of another ship, but it would never be the same. The memories of the Essex haunted him, and he could never escape the dark shadow of what had happened. He eventually retired from the sea, unable to come to terms with the decisions made during those dark days on the ocean. In the years that followed, the story of the Essex was told and retold. It became a cautionary tale, a reminder of the fragility of human life and the lengths to which people will go to survive. It was a reminder that even in the most desperate of circumstances, the human spirit can endure, but at what cost? The terrifying true story of the Essex and its crew serves as a chilling reminder of the brutal power of the ocean and the darkness that can befall those who are caught in its grip. It is a story of survival at all costs, of men who were pushed to their limits and beyond, and of the moral compromises they made to stay alive. The legacy of the Essex is one of tragedy, loss, and the haunting memory of what the crew was forced to do in their fight for survival. It is a dark chapter in maritime history, and one that will never be forgotten as you reflect on this story. Consider the lengths to which you would go to survive. Would you hold on to your humanity, or would you make the same desperate choices the men of the Essex made? The line between survival and madness is razor thin, and the ocean, as they discovered, has a way of revealing that truth in the most horrific ways imaginable. If you like this content, please subscribe